These are some of the best AAA games that you might have overlooked, so let's look at the first game on our list, Cyberpunk 2077. Cyberpunk 2077. Yeah, you've probably heard a lot about this game already, and not all of it was great at launch. The bugs, the glitches, the drama, it was like a reality TV show unfolding in real time. But here's the thing, if you've already written it off, I think it's time to give this one another look. Because, believe it or not, Cyberpunk 2077 has quietly transformed into one of the most ambitious and engaging RPGs of this generation. First off, let's talk about the world of Night City. This place is alive. It's a neon-drenched sprawl that feels like a character in its own right. You've got this sense of scale and verticality that you don't get in most open-world games. Every district has its own vibe, its own story, and you can just feel the weight of it all. Like every alley, every skyscraper has secret stories and weird, fascinating stuff going on. The NPCs actually live their lives, they're not just wandering around for the sake of it. A city feels like it breathes with or without you, which makes diving into it that much more immersive. And let's be honest here, CD Projekt Red has really pulled a No Man's Sky on us. They've patched the hell out of this game since its rough launch. Performance issues have been ironed out, bugs squashed, and they've even added a ton of new content. If you're playing on a new gen console or a solid PC, you're going to experience Night City the way it was meant to be: slick, smooth, and utterly absorbing. And the story is way deeper than the early memes let on. Sure, it's got Keanu Reeves doing his rockstar anarchist thing, and that's cool in itself, but what makes Cyberpunk 2077 special is how it balances bombastic, action-packed missions with these quiet, almost intimate moments of storytelling. You'll have these little side missions that start small but spiral into some of the most compelling character studies in recent RPG memory. The narrative dives into topics like the ethics of artificial intelligence, the blurred line between humanity and technology, and even just finding your identity in a city that's constantly trying to sell you a new one. And let's talk gameplay. At its core, Cyberpunk 2077 lets you play however the hell you want. Want to go guns blazing with a shotgun and cybernetic gorilla arms? Go for it. Prefer sneaking through vents and hacking security systems like some digital ninja? There's a build for that too. The amount of customization in your playstyle is insane, and there's always more than one way to tackle a mission. Plus, with the new updates, combat is actually fun now, like really fun. There's a weight to the weapons, a rhythm to the melee fights, and hacking has a complexity that makes you feel like a proper netrunner.
Shit! What was that?
Also, can we just take a moment to appreciate the side quests? I know the main storyline has all the flashy cutscenes and big moments, but the side quests are where Cyberpunk 2077 really shines. These aren't your typical fetch quests or kill this many enemies deals. They're fleshed out, they're meaningful, and they often have surprising depth to them. You'll find yourself in these bizarre situations like investigating a sentient vending machine or helping a rogue AI taxi service, and the choices you make in these quests, they matter more than you'd expect. Look, I get it. The launch was a mess, and it was easy to dismiss Cyberpunk 2077 as another overhyped flop. But if you've been sitting on the sidelines, waiting for the right moment to dive in, trust me, now is the time. This game isn't just a redemption story, it's one of the most unique RPG experiences out there. Don't let the early drama fool you. Cyberpunk 2077 is way better than you think. Mad Max. Mad Max is one of those games that seem to sneak under a lot of people's radars, but if you dig a little deeper, you'll find a hidden gem that's way better than you might think. Released back in 2015, right around the hype of Mad Max Fury Road, it was easy to brush this one off as just another movie tie-in cash grab, but honestly, it's a lot more than that. First, let's talk about the world it drops you into. The wasteland here is stunning. I know it's a barren desert, and at first glance it might seem like there's not much going on, but Avalanche Studios did an incredible job making this post-apocalyptic hellscape feel alive. The way the wind kicks up the sand, the sun scorches everything, and those random brutal storms can come out of nowhere and just absolutely ruin your day, all of it just sells the atmosphere so well. There's this feeling of desolation but also beauty where you can be cruising through the dunes and just get lost in the eerie, haunting stillness of it all. The car combat is where Mad Max really flexes its muscles. If you've ever wanted to feel like you're living in a Mad Max movie, this is the game that nails that feeling. The physics are chunky, weighty, and brutal. Every collision feels like it has impact, and using the harpoon to tear pieces off enemy vehicles or yank a driver right out of their seat never gets old. You get to build up your magnum opus, your own customizable death machine on wheels, and each upgrade feels meaningful. From the chassis to the nitrous, the handling to the spikes and flamethrowers, you feel this real connection to your ride, like it's an extension of yourself in this harsh, unforgiving world. And while the car combat steals the show, the on-foot stuff isn't too shabby either. Sure, it borrows heavily from the Arkham-style combat with its counter-heavy mechanics, but there's a rawness to it that fits the Mad Max aesthetic. You feel every punch, every bone-crunching hit, and the takedowns have a satisfying brutality to them. The combat isn't super deep, but it's visceral, it's scrappy, and it just fits the whole vibe. What really elevates Mad Max, though, is the sense of progression. You're constantly upgrading both Max and your car, and it feels like every little scrap of metal you collect out in the wasteland matters. You're not just aimlessly wandering around, you're always working towards something, whether it's a faster engine, tougher armor, or just a cooler jacket for Max. And speaking of Max, the game actually does a pretty good job of capturing that lone wolf, reluctant hero vibe. He's a man of few words, haunted by his past, and the story, while simple, captures that gritty, survivalist tone that fits the franchise. Plus, the game's filled with all these little, unique encounters that keep things fresh. You'll stumble upon camps filled with raiders, strongholds to conquer, or even weird little side missions that flesh out the bizarre world of Mad Max. There's a lot of environmental storytelling here, 2 wrecked vehicles, abandoned settlements, and random bits of lore scattered throughout the wasteland that hint at the world's history before it all went to hell. It's not perfect, sure, there are some repetitive elements, especially when it comes to clearing out enemy camps or scavenging for parts. But the core gameplay loop is so satisfying that it doesn't really feel like a chore. If anything, it feels like just another day in the wasteland, trying to survive and scrape together whatever you can. Look, if you're into open world games and you've got a love for the post-apocalyptic aesthetic, give Mad Max a shot. It's one of those games that didn't quite get the recognition it deserved, but if you take the time to dive in, you'll find an experience that's surprisingly deep, engaging, and way better than you'd expect. Death Stranding.
Oh, great. Fuck.
Death Stranding is a game that's definitely not for everyone, but if you give it a chance, it's got a lot more going for it than you might expect. Hideo Kojima's ambitious project is often polarizing, but once you get past the initial strangeness, it reveals itself as something truly unique and memorable. Let's start with the world. It's post-apocalyptic, yes, but it's not the typical ruin and dust scenario. Instead, it's this hauntingly beautiful landscape filled with rain that ages everything it touches, mountains and strange, eerie creatures. Kojima and his team created an atmosphere that's equal parts desolate and breathtaking. There's a serene, almost meditative quality to the way you traverse the land, and it's something that really grows on you the more you play. The gameplay is where Death Stranding really divides people. It's essentially a delivery simulation where you're tasked with carrying packages across a fractured, dangerous landscape. At first glance, this might seem like a boring or repetitive concept, but there's a surprising depth to it. The challenge of balancing your cargo, planning your routes, and dealing with various obstacles from treacherous terrain to hostile BTS beach things turns into a kind of zen-like puzzle. It's a game that rewards patience and strategy, and while it might seem slow or odd at first, it's incredibly satisfying when you get into the rhythm of it. Then there's the social aspect, which is something I didn't expect to be so impactful. The game features a unique system where you can see the creations and structures that other players have left behind in their own worlds. These can range from simple ladders and bridges to full-on safe houses and roads. It creates a sense of community even if you're not directly interacting with other players. You're all working towards the same goal of reconnecting the fractured world, and it's really rewarding to see how your efforts contribute to a larger shared experience. And the story, oh boy, the story. Kojima's trademark weirdness is in full effect here, with a narrative that blends sci-fi, existential themes, and a hefty dose of philosophical musings.
See? So I'm a prisoner.
These aren't handcuffs. They're cutting-edge devices that keep us all connected.
It's not always easy to follow, and it definitely requires some patience and investment, but it's also incredibly intriguing. The characters are quirky and memorable, and the world building is rich in detail. The emotional beats hit hard, and there are moments of real depth that make the journey feel worthwhile. The graphics and sound design deserve a shout out too. The game looks phenomenal with its photorealistic environments and stunning vistas. The soundtrack, featuring tracks by artists like Low Roar, adds a hauntingly beautiful layer to the experience. It's a game that's designed to be immersive, and it succeeds on that front. Sure, the game has its flaws, the pacing can be slow, and the delivery mechanics might not be everyone's cup of tea. The story can be convoluted, and there are moments where the game feels like it's trying to be a bit too profound for its own good. But if you stick with it, Death Stranding offers a one-of-a-kind experience that's worth exploring. It's a game that challenges conventional ideas about what a video game can be and does so in a way that's both ambitious and deeply personal. If you're open to something different and are willing to embrace its slower pace, Death Stranding is definitely a game that's better than you might initially think.
I prefer the driver's seat.
Max Payne 3. Max Payne 3 might not always get the spotlight, but if you're into intense, stylish shooters, this game is a hidden gem. Seriously, if you haven't given it a shot, you're missing out. Let's dive into what makes this game stand out. Max Payne 3 picks up where the previous games left off, but this time Max is in Sao Paulo, Brazil. He's working as a private security guy trying to lay low after all the chaos from the earlier games. But of course, trouble finds him, and he's thrown into a gritty kidnapping case that really tests him. The story is dark and personal, giving Max's character some serious depth and making the narrative feel like a noir thriller.
Just got cowboys running security downstairs. Something rotten in the air.
And the gameplay, oh man, it's fantastic. Remember bullet time from the previous games, it's back and it's better than ever. The thrill of slowing down time, dodging bullets, and taking out bad guys is just as satisfying as it was before. The shooting mechanics are sharp and responsive, making each gunfight feel like a high-stakes action sequence. Plus, the variety of weapons keeps things fresh and exciting. Visually, the game is a treat. The Sao Paulo setting is brought to life with incredible detail. The environments are gritty and realistic, perfectly matching the game's dark tone. And the cinematic presentation, those dramatic camera angles, and the moody lighting really make you feel like you're in the middle of an action movie. The soundtrack complements everything nicely, with a mix of atmospheric tunes and intense tracks that keep the adrenaline pumping. What really stands out in Max Payne 3 is the attention to detail. The game doesn't just throw you into the action, it builds up the story with well-crafted cutscenes and moments that flesh out the characters and world. The transitions between gameplay and narrative are smooth, making the whole experience feel immersive. The motion capture and voice acting are spot on, adding a layer of realism to Max and his world.
I lost my edge, along with everything else. It was time to choose. A nasty fall.
The level design is another highlight. Each level is carefully crafted with lots of opportunities to explore and different ways to approach combat. Whether you're fighting through a nightclub or dealing with a tense hostage situation, the game keeps you engaged and on your toes. Guardians of the Galaxy. You're Guardians of the Galaxy now. Here's a game that totally caught me off guard in the best way possible. When I first saw the trailers, I figured it was just another typical superhero game trying to cash in on the MCU's popularity. But after playing it, it's so much better than I expected. It's honestly one of the best surprises in recent years. First off, the writing is absolutely stellar. The banter between the Guardians, it feels spot on, just like in the movies, but somehow even more personal and funny. You spend so much time with these characters that their chemistry really shines. The game nails the dynamic of this ragtag group. You've got Peter Quill, Rocket, Groot, Gamora, and Drax constantly bickering, joking, and throwing shade at each other. It's like being part of a family road trip.
Is it, doing it?
What?
If that family was constantly on the verge of blowing up space pirates. What really surprised me is that this game has heart, like real emotional depth. The story digs into the characters' backstories and relationships in a way that makes them feel even more fleshed out than what we've seen in the films.
I improved it. Also, did anyone tell you that you snore? I thought Drax was bad, but wow. Quill.
You start to care about them in a deeper way, especially when the game throws in some pretty touching moments. It's not all jokes and explosions, there's some real emotional weight here that balances out all the chaos.
Kinda looks like a metal face hugger.
That is clearly a spinal control unit.
Speaking of chaos, the gameplay is a blast. You only play as Star-Lord, but you can command the rest of the team during combat, and it feels surprisingly tactical. The combat system is super fluid, and you're constantly juggling between shooting enemies and using your team's abilities in creative ways. Every Guardian has their own special skills, so you're always thinking on your feet, figuring out how to use their abilities together to clear waves of enemies or solve puzzles. It's fast-paced, but it never feels overwhelming. And the visuals are gorgeous. Seriously, the environments are wild, colorful, and just fun to explore. Whether you're flying through space or running through alien landscapes, everything has that comic book flair with vibrant colors and cool designs that make each area feel unique. And the character models, spot on. They didn't go for the MCU look, which actually works in the game's favor, giving it its own identity. Then, of course, there's the soundtrack. Oh man, the music is perfect. The 80s hits in this game really elevate the whole experience, and they even play a role in combat you can call a huddle. During a fight where you and the Guardians regroup, and depending on how well you rally them, you get a power boost and one of those epic songs kicks in. So imagine blasting enemies while Take On Me is blaring in the background. It's as fun as it sounds. The only downside is that the combat can get a bit repetitive after a while. You're fighting a lot of the same enemy types, and though the team mechanics keep things fresh, some of the fights can feel like they're dragging on. But honestly, the story and characters more than make up for it. Plus, there's a decent amount of exploration and puzzle solving in between the battles to break things up. Overall, Guardians of the Galaxy is way better than you'd expect from a superhero game. It's got a killer story, fantastic character moments, fun gameplay, and a soundtrack that's an absolute banger. If you're a fan of the Guardians or just looking for a well-written, action-packed adventure, this is a game you shouldn't miss. Batman Arkham Origins. Batman Arkham Origins is probably the most overlooked game in the Arkham series, but honestly, it's a lot better than people give it credit for. I get it when a game isn't made by the original developers, in this case Rocksteady, fans can be skeptical. But trust me, Arkham Origins has plenty to offer, especially if you're into the darker, grittier side of Batman's story. First off, this game gives us a younger, rougher Batman. He's not the seasoned vigilante we see in Arkham Asylum or Arkham City. This is a more brutal, inexperienced Bruce Wayne who's still figuring out his role in Gotham. That makes the story more compelling, as you're getting to see him before he fully becomes the Dark Knight we know. The game really leans into that raw, unpolished side of Batman, and it's a fresh take on the character. The story itself focuses on a Christmas Eve showdown where 8 of the world's deadliest assassins are out to collect a bounty on Batman's head. It's basically one bad night for Bruce, but it's an awesome setup for an action-packed game. The interactions between Batman and these assassins like Deathstroke and Bane are intense, and each boss fight feels unique. The game does a great job of making every encounter feel personal.
Tell me where I can find Black Mask. The limit you place on yourself is they collecting this money.
One of the highlights is the relationship between Batman and the Joker. Origins dives deep into the early days of their rivalry, and it's fascinating to see how their twisted dynamic starts to form. Troy Baker, who voices Joker, does a fantastic job here. Sure, he's not Mark Hamill, but he brings his own spin to the role, and it works.
This rage, who directed at me?
Now, let's talk gameplay. If you've played any of the other Arkham games, the combat will feel instantly familiar. You've got that smooth, counter-heavy system that flows so well, and it's just as satisfying here. Plus, you still have all the gadgets you'd expect, like the Beijarang grappling hook and explosive gel. What sets Arkham Origins apart, though, is the crime scene investigation mechanic. You get to piece together crime scenes using Batman's detective skills, rewinding and fast-forwarding events in a 3D space to figure out what happened. It adds a cool, more cerebral element to the game, which is a nice change of pace from the usual brawling.
Ever. No way. You gotta answer for dropping me off that rooftop, buddy. No.
The city of Gotham in Arkham Origins is a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's bigger and more sprawling than what we saw in Arkham City. The snowy Christmas Eve setting is awesome and gives Gotham a really moody, atmospheric vibe. But on the flip side, the city can feel a bit too empty at times. You're gliding around these huge areas, but there aren't a ton of people or enemies out on the streets, which can make it feel a little lifeless. One area where Arkham Origins really shines, though, is the boss fights. Each encounter with one of the assassins is memorable, and they really push Batman to his limits. The Deathstroke fight, in particular, is a standout. It's tactical, challenging, and feels like a real showdown between 2 elite fighters. It's one of those battles where you feel like you've truly earned the victory. Now, let's be real, Arkham Origins had some rough spots at launch, mostly with bugs and glitches, but those issues have mostly been patched, and what's left is a solid Batman experience that holds its own in the Arkham series. It might not hit the highs of Arkham City or Arkham Knight, but it's got a gripping story, intense combat, and some of the best boss fights in the franchise. So, if you skipped Arkham Origins because it wasn't developed by Rocksteady or because you heard it had bugs, I'd say give it another shot. It's a seriously underrated game that digs deep into Batman's early years and delivers some awesome moments along the way. If you're a fan of the Arkham series, it's definitely worth your time. Immortals Fenyx Rising. Immortals Fenyx Rising is one of those games that kind of came out of nowhere and ended up being way more fun than anyone expected. I remember seeing the early trailers and thinking, okay, this looks like Breath of the Wild mixed with Greek mythology. But what I didn't expect was just how charming and genuinely entertaining it turned out to be. It's one of those games that doesn't take itself too seriously, and that makes the whole experience feel refreshingly light and enjoyable. First off, the world. The Golden Isle is just gorgeous. It's this vibrant, colorful open world that feels alive with sprawling landscapes, towering mountains, and ancient ruins scattered everywhere. And since it's based on Greek mythology, you're running into gods, monsters, and legends left and right, but it's all done with this playful, almost tongue-in-cheek humor. The world is split into different regions, each themed around one of the Greek gods, and it's just fun to explore. You're gliding through the air, riding your mount, or solving puzzles, and there's always something interesting to discover around the corner. And the combat is super satisfying. It's got that fluid combo-based style that reminds me a bit of Assassin's Creed, which makes sense since it's developed by Ubisoft but with more of a mythological twist. You've got Fenyx, your customizable character, wielding weapons like swords, axes, and bows, but the real fun comes with the godly powers you unlock. Things like launching enemies into the air with the bracers of Heracles or summoning spears from the ground with Uri's Wrath keep the combat fresh and over the top. Plus, you're constantly facing off against all these mythical creatures like harpies, minotaurs, and even Cerberus, so each fight feels epic. And then there are the puzzles. If you're into puzzle solving, you'll love this game. The vaults of Tartaros are scattered all over the map, and they're essentially these mini dungeons where you have to use your wits and Fenyx's powers to get through. It's very reminiscent of the shrines in Breath of the Wild, but with a Greek mythology twist. Some puzzles are simple physics-based challenges, while others can really make you stop and think. And they're just challenging enough to be satisfying without ever feeling frustrating. One of the best parts about Immortals Fenyx Rising is how it doesn't overwhelm you. The game strikes a nice balance between exploration, combat, and puzzle solving. It doesn't feel like it's bloated with endless side quests or unnecessary busy work. Instead, you're encouraged to explore at your own pace, and almost everything you do in the game feels rewarding. Plus, the upgrade system is pretty engaging, letting you improve Fenyx's abilities, weapons, and stamina in meaningful ways as you progress. Now, sure, Immortals Fenyx Rising isn't without its flaws. Some might say it leans a bit too heavily on the Breath of the Wild formula with its stamina-based climbing and gliding mechanics, and the humor, while fun, might not be everyone's cup of tea. The story, while charming, doesn't hit the emotional highs of more serious games. It's more of a fun, light-hearted adventure than a deeply moving epic. But that's what makes it stand out. It's a breath of fresh air in a gaming landscape filled with darker, more intense narratives. Sometimes you just want to glide through a colorful world, take down a mythological monster, and laugh at a goofy joke from Zeus, and Immortals Fenyx Rising delivers exactly that. If you've been sleeping on this one, give it a go. It's an underrated gem that's way better than you might think. It doesn't try to reinvent the wheel, but it nails the fun, whimsical adventure vibes so well that it's hard not to love. Shadow of the Tomb Raider.
Let's keep looking.
Shadow of the Tomb Raider is one of those games that didn't get nearly enough love when it came out, but if you're into action-adventure games with a focus on exploration and puzzle solving, this one's a real treat. It might not have made as big a splash as the earlier entries in the rebooted trilogy, but it's easily one of the most refined and visually stunning of the bunch. First off, let's talk about how beautiful this game is. I mean, the environments are jaw-droppingly gorgeous. You're exploring dense jungles, ancient tombs, and sprawling cities in South America, and the level of detail is just insane. The lighting, the textures, the little environmental touches, it all makes you feel like you're really there, trudging through the mud or scaling a cliffside, and the game makes great use of the setting, with lush, overgrown landscapes that feel wild and untamed. It's a perfect backdrop for the darker, more mature tone that Shadow of the Tomb Raider takes compared to the previous games. One of the best parts of Shadow of the Tomb Raider is the focus on exploration. The tombs are more intricate and dangerous than ever, and solving their puzzles gives you that same sense of satisfaction you get from the older games. These aren't just side activities, either each tomb feels like a significant challenge with clever environmental puzzles and some seriously tense platforming sections. If you've missed the classic tomb raiding vibe, this game definitely brings it back. The gameplay is as solid as ever. Combat still feels tight, but Shadow of the Tomb Raider emphasizes stealth a lot more this time around. You can blend into the environment, cover yourself in mud to camouflage, and use the jungle to your advantage. It makes you feel like a predator stalking enemies from the shadows, picking them off one by one. There's something incredibly satisfying about silently taking down a whole squad without ever being seen. And, of course, Lara's got her usual array of tools, bows, guns, climbing axes, which all feel great to use, whether you're in combat or just exploring. That said, Shadow of the Tomb Raider isn't perfect. The story, while more introspective, can feel a bit uneven at times, and some of the side characters don't get as much development as you'd hope. Also, if you've played the previous 2 games, the core gameplay loop will feel pretty familiar. It doesn't reinvent the wheel, but it refines everything that worked in Tomb Raider and Rise of the Tomb Raider. But here's the thing, if you're a fan of the series, this game is an absolute must-play. It wraps up Lara's origin trilogy in a satisfying way, and the improvements to exploration and puzzle solving make it a real standout. It's not just about combat, it's about uncovering the mysteries of the world around you, and it's got that classic Tomb Raiding feel we all know and love. So if you missed Shadow of the Tomb Raider when it first came out, or just brushed it off as more of the same, I'd say give it another shot. It's way better than you might think, and if you're craving that blend of adventure, exploration, and puzzle solving, this one hits the mark. Horizon Zero Dawn. Horizon Zero Dawn is one of those games that you start playing and before you know it, hours have flown by because you're so hooked. It does this amazing job of blending a fresh concept with classic open world elements, and honestly, it's way better than you might expect if you're just looking at screenshots or trailers. The setting is absolutely gorgeous. You're in this lush, post-apocalyptic world where nature has reclaimed everything, but there's this crazy twist, massive robotic creatures roaming around, and the world feels alive. You've got dense forests, icy mountains, wide open plains, and then out of nowhere, you'll stumble upon the ruins of our civilization. It's a weird mix of futuristic tech and ancient tribal life, and it's stunning. I found myself just stopping to admire the view more times than I care to admit. Then there's the combat, which is so much fun. You play as Aloy, and instead of just shooting arrows and hoping for the best, you're using strategy. You've got to study these mechanical beasts, find their weak points, and use the right tools to take them down. It's not just a mindless fight, it feels like every encounter is a puzzle, and when you finally bring down one of those massive thunderjaws after carefully planning your approach, so satisfying. But it's not all about the action. The story really surprised me with how deep and emotional it gets. You start out just learning about Aloy and her place in this strange world, but as you explore more, you uncover what happened to humanity and why these machines are roaming around. And let me tell you, it hits harder than I expected. There are twists and revelations that actually make you think about the world in a different way. It's one of those stories that stays with you after you finish the game. What really makes Horizon stand out though is how it mixes all these elements together. You've got exploration, combat, crafting, and a really well-told story, and none of it feels overwhelming or out of place. It's like this perfect blend that just clicks, and before you know it, you're deep into side quests and try and take down a giant robot bird. If you've been on the fence about it or just never got around to playing, trust me, this game is so much better than you might think. It's a must-play, and it's one of those experiences that's hard to put down once you get started. Hitman Trilogy. The Hitman Trilogy, man. Where do I even start with this one? These games are an absolute masterclass in stealth, and if you haven't given them a shot yet, you're seriously missing out on something unique. I get it, not everyone's into the whole stealth thing, but trust me, these games are so much more than sneaking around. You play as Agent 47, this super cool bald assassin who's basically a chameleon. The way these games are set up is brilliant. You're dropped into these massive open sandbox levels, and how you complete your mission is totally up to you. You could go in guns blazing, but the real fun is figuring out how to take out your target in the most creative, silent way possible. Dress up as a chef and poison your target's drink? Sure. Set up an accidental chandelier drop on them? Absolutely. There's a ridiculous amount of freedom, and the level design is just chef's kiss. Every map feels like a puzzle, and there's always something new to discover no matter how many times you play. What's awesome is how the trilogy connects. You can import levels from Hitman 1 and 2 into Hitman 3, so it feels like this massive continuous world. And honestly, the replayability is off the charts. You're not just doing the same thing over and over each time you play, you find new ways to approach the missions. It's the kind of game where you plan your hits with precision, but then something unexpected happens, and you've got to improvise on the fly. That's when it gets really exciting. And let me tell you, the detail in these games is unreal. From a glitzy fashion show in Paris to a high-tech skyscraper in Dubai, every location feels alive. The NPCs are going about their business, having conversations and reacting to what you do. It makes you feel like you're part of this living, breathing world where every little action can cause a ripple effect. Now, the stealth mechanics, they're top-notch. You've got disguises, distractions, hiding spots, and a ton of gadgets to play with. The thrill of silently taking out a target, slipping away unnoticed, and walking out like nothing happened is so satisfying. And the variety. You've got missions in a vineyard, a massive mansion, a club. It never feels like you're just doing the same thing in a different location. Sure, the games aren't for everyone. They can be a bit slow if you're used to fast-paced action, and sometimes the trial and error aspect can get a little frustrating, but if you like games that reward patience, creativity, and planning, the Hitman trilogy is one of the best out there. Honestly, I'd say give it a go if you haven't yet. Once you get into the rhythm of it, it's hard to stop, and every mission feels like a story waiting to unfold in the most insane way possible.